You are listening to This is Oklahoma, hosted by Mike Hearn, telling stories of Oklahomans and those that have made it their home.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of This is Oklahoma. Mike Hearn here, host, back with another episode. Excited to share this episode with you today, but before we do, huge shout out to our sponsors. The Oklahoma Hall of Fame have been sharing Oklahoma's story through its people since 1927. For more information on the Oklahoma Hall of Fame, go to www.oklahomahof.com. And for daily updates, go to oklahomahof on Instagram and give them a follow. Our other sponsor today is the Chickasaw Nation. Now, the Chickasaw Nation have sponsored pretty much everything in Oklahoma. They're a huge supporter of Oklahoma. And it's an honor to have their name and their brand supporting this podcast. A huge shout out to Governor Anatobi for supporting this podcast. It really means a lot. This episode is brought to you by the Doghouse OKC. Recently, I have been in need of some doggy daycare for my two pups, and the Doghouse have come in clutch. The team over there are incredible. They've taken care of my two golden doodles, and so it's been an honor to partner with them on the podcast and share the love. Adding to that is the Doghouse, and so if you're in need of doggy daycare in the day or boarding overnight, they do grooming and other cool things too, but I've had a fantastic experience, and it's an honor and a privilege to share this with you too. So go to thedogHouseOKC.com and follow them on Instagram at thedogHouseOKC, and hopefully our pups will run into each other. What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of This is Oklahoma. Mike Hearn here, host, back with another episode. We are down at the Bedford studio, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce our guest today, Mr. Brian Fayak, who is the founder, president, and CEO of Nextep. So we're going to hear all about that. But I will say, how many times do you get compliments on your beard daily?
Not daily.
Not daily?
But
surprises me.
I have gotten some compliments on it, and I'm very proud of that. So, for a long time, I kept my beard really short, and in COVID, I grew it out longer, and I like it.
Okay. My dad had a mustache forever, could never grow a beard, and then my brother can't grow one, and then I grew one a little bit, and mine serves as a way to hide my double chins. So
well, you and I have a similarity there, and actually, how you wear your beard is how I wore mine, till post-COVID, and I grew it out, and I've enjoyed it.
Do we have a beard grooming routine every morning? Have we gone that far?
Well, that's the downside of having a longer beard, is trimming beards isn't so easy. No, so. I adjusted my schedule, and I go to the barber every 2 weeks, and not for the top of my hair because it's a little thinner, but he keeps my beard in shape, and I don't know, I still haven't got the hang of it where I can really trim it.
Yeah. Who's your barber in town?
I go to Gray Street Barber over there in Norman, and when I went over there, when I first grew my beard out, I was like, hey, I'm going to go this try to find someone to help me out with my beard. So I found the guy that had a long beard, that was a barber, and he does great.
Okay. Yeah, I wish I could grow the full. I'm a little patchy down the sides, so I'm sure it'll come at some point, but I can grow like the grill pretty good. It just gets long here and not long on the sides. So I need to fill it in at some point. Mine goes bright red, though. That's another issue.
Well, but there's nothing wrong with a red beard.
I have some ginger in my family, so it's got to be there somewhere. So, you mentioned you kind of based in Norman. The office is in Norman. Did you grow up and were born and raised in Norman, or were you born and raised somewhere else?
Born and raised. So my dad was Air Force, and so we moved around a little bit, but not near as much as a lot of military families. So I was born actually in Waco, Texas, and there used to be a military base there years ago. And I was actually born while and my mom and dad met there in Waco, Texas, kind of like an officer and a gentleman thing. And then subsequently, my dad went to Vietnam. I was actually born while he was in Vietnam. And then we moved to Oklahoma in about 70, 71. So I was just going into kindergarten. And we moved to Altus, and Altus Air Force Base is where my dad was stationed, and we were there for quite a long time. And my dad ended up retiring there.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of nice to be stable in a place for quite a long time. Like you said, most military families have to travel around a lot and go to a bunch of different schools, and it sounds like you kind of had a steady childhood out there.
Yeah, we did. We did have one adventure going into after my 7th grade year. The summer after my 7th grade year, my father got transferred to Spain. And so we went to Spain for 3 years, and I was not excited about that at all. But once we did it and got back, and then, of course, all these years looking back on it, it was such a fantastic experience getting to see how life is in other parts of the world, but actually, living there for 3 years. It was just a great experience.
How old were you when you went to Spain?
So 7th, 8th, and 9th grades. So that 14, 15, 16. Yeah.
Great childhood years to be around. I can see why you weren't happy going, right? Oklahoma.
Well,
your friendship group.
Yeah, I mean, the crazy thing about it was, so this was like 81 or so, and the world is different and countries are different. And one of the things about we went to Zaragoza, and there was a military base there, and that has since closed. But we were there, and we had to live off base. So you had the big town of Zaragoza, which was very, very modern. There was Kentucky Fried Chicken there and some things like that, which I thought was fascinating, because in Altus, I don't even think there was a Kentucky Fried Chicken at that time. And
Sonic, and that was it.
Yeah, Sonic.
Yeah.
And, then if you went if you went out of the town and you went into some of the smaller towns, which we lived off base for the first year until there was some base housing, and we lived in a place called Alto de la Muela, which was a kind of a summer home community for people in Zaragoza. And that the interesting thing I thought was, now that was like going back in time, so you're in a smaller town, and it was very different. And there were, I can remember vividly seeing my first sheep herder, walking sheep in front of the car, and it just felt like we went back in time quite a ways. And so, you move over there, and you're 14 years old, and you get dropped right in the middle of a community like that, and there's no TV, no telephone, no radio. Well, there's radio, but Spanish radio. And then the military base did have a radio station, and it was kind of like radio back in the 30s and 40s, where you'd have a period of time that was jazz, a period of time that was, country, a period, and at night they actually had a period of time that was, there would be storytellers, on the radio, and I can remember listening to the radio and like watching TV.
Did you speak Spanish out there? Did you have to learn?
Yeah, I got to where I could understand a whole lot better than I could speak, and I could piece a few words together, and but after about a year we moved on base, and then and I'm 14, and not happy about being there. And so once we got on base and we were in our own little bubble, so the short answer is no, not really.
Okay. Are you only child? Do you have siblings that went with you?
I do have a sister. She's about 4 years younger than I am. And so it was me and my mom and my sister and my dad.
Looking back now as an adult, looking at those times, being 14, 15, 16, I'm sure there's a completely different outlook now than what it was back then, right? Back then you're probably like, why am I going? I don't want to do this. I want to leave Altus. Whereas now you're like, I saw some great things, got to experience some things I might not have.
Yeah, I mean, at that time you're so worried about your friend group and how you fit in, and of course moving and trying to figure out how to fit in a new community and a new school is always interesting. So those pressures, were not fun as a 14-year-old, right. But nowadays, it was one of the most fond memories I have, and highly recommend that anybody that can certainly visit outside of the United States, but you get an opportunity to visit over a period of time or live over a period of time and see how things are outside of your own country. It is an education all in of itself, right? It's as valuable as going to college.
Absolutely. So at that time, then you come back. What are you thinking about career-wise? Is kind of family and dad's influence in the Air Force a factor, or are you thinking you're going a completely different route? Obviously, you're 16, 17 years old. College is on the radar maybe at some point. Take me to that time of your life and the kind of decisions and the interests you're making.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things about that was it was also a little disorienting because we came back, halfway through my 10th grade year, so I was saying 7th, 8th, and 9th, but it was about halfway through my 10th grade year. Came back that Christmas break, so you're kind of getting right up on that, and you hadn't had that exposure as much to colleges and different things. So for me, it was a lot about being involved in athletics, and I played football and some other sports, but football was one that I was a little better at. And that really shaped my path on my future and what I was doing and where I was going. So I didn't have as much of a plan on my own as I followed this athletic route. And that was, playing football in Altus and Altus Bulldogs, and then getting a scholarship and going to the University of Central Oklahoma up in Edmond and playing there. So that's kind of how my...
Okay. What was your position on the football field?
Well, I was probably best at offensive tackle, but also played defensive tackle. So my first 2 years at UCO, I played defensive tackle, and my second 2 years, I played offensive tackle. So those two.
Yeah. So UCO, you go from Altus, you do football at UCO. Is Edmond at that point and coming to UCO like a big city change for you? Coming from Altus, like how are you feeling coming up here, being away from home as an 18-year-old coming to college?
Well, I can tell you, it felt like I went to a whole different planet, right? Or maybe like I went to Spain. Right. So it felt like Edmond and UCO was totally different than Altus, and so much in a way. When I think about it, I think I thought it was like, hey, nothing that happens in Edmond and Oklahoma City would ever get back to what happened in to anybody in Altus. And of course, it's only 2 hours from Edmond to Altus, so that wasn't true. But yeah, it felt very different.
What? So you go to UCO. You like I said, feel like it's a different planet. What are the interests as far as academically at that point? I mean, as a kid, as a former athlete myself, like obviously you want to keep the dream alive and you want to play football forever or play golf forever, whatever your sport is. But clearly there comes a point where you're like, I'm not cut out to make this. I want to, I have to have not a backup plan, but I got to have a job somewhere. Yes.
No, I think. You go and you play, and listen, you're playing for a smaller college. You're not playing, for OU or something like that. But it was great, and it was, a great bonding experience, and one of the most wonderful times of my life was being there and being a part of a team and the friendships and those kind of things. So, no, I loved it. And, school, I was much less interested in that at the time, and you know, you had a couple of years to kind of figure out what your major was going to be. So, and typical me at that time, I never gave much thought to what I thought my major was going to be. What I was interested in was maybe finding the easiest major to get, right? I mean, so anyway, for me, what was easier was more sociology, criminal justice, which is what I got my degree in, then maybe, you know, math and some of the business things, which is interesting because I ended up going into business. But, you know, that I was definitely on the side of school is not the top of my fun list.
Yeah. I join you in that. I chose, my degree was in marketing because it was one less accounting class. And I'm like, I'm not cut out to do the number thing. But I mean, we eventually get into it at some point. But in school, you're like, I don't need that. We'll figure it out.
Yeah.
What was it about criminal, other than it being a little easier and sociology and criminology, what was it that also drew you towards that as far as, is this going to be a potential career for me? Do I want to go into law enforcement? Do I follow Dad's footsteps at all? I mean, what?
Well, you know, my dad had soured on the military for a little while with his last tour. So when we went to Spain and came back, and he wasn't as excited about it. And that was, of course, around the time that I was thinking about what I would do. And I did have an opportunity to go to the Air Force Academy and play there if that's what I wanted to do. But I decided I didn't want to do that, and I didn't want to be in the military. Not really because my dad's experience, but it just didn't feel like the path I wanted to take. And probably a big factor of that, and at that age, was none of my friends were, you know, interested in that. But you know, so there was those ways that I thought about school and those kind of things.
Yeah. So you graduate UCO. What's the plan as far as getting into the main, in the world, and have to grow up and get a job and become an adult and all those things? What's the next step after college?
Yeah, well, one of the steps was to leave college and get a job, and I really didn't want to do that. That's a big transition in people's lives, and sometimes that's obviously a scary time. And so I stayed at UCO another year and got another degree in industrial safety. And with that degree, when I got that degree, I went out and I decided, I thought, well, criminal justice, I might go into law enforcement. My roommate at the time, who also was criminal justice, went on to be a federal marshal. And I got that second degree in industrial safety and kind of started my career that way. And, back then you answered help wanted ads in the back of the newspaper. And sometimes those ads were blind and didn't have a company to them. So, I'd put out resumes, got a call from somebody, did some interviews, and it ended up being one of the very first companies that was in our industry, in the professional employer industry. And I didn't know what that was, but they needed to hire someone in the safety field to go out and visit clients and make sure the clients were safe and provide safety services, and we provided services to a lot of oil and gas companies. So, that was my first job, but it happened to be in the industry that I've spent my whole life in.
Yeah. When you dive into that first job and you get hired and you're out dealing with oil and gas and safety, does there come a point where you're like, this is not just a job, I actually really enjoy doing this, and there's a people element, and it starts to become, you start to find your feet versus, oh, this is just my first job, I'm kind of ticking the box of what society says I should do. Does there come a moment when you're in your young 20s and you're working and you think, I'm finding my purpose here. This is kind of where I want the rest of my life to go.
Yeah, for me, that in our industry, when that happened for me was when I was working for the company here, and that hired me, and they were based here in Oklahoma. But I was work from home before work from home became fashionable. So I was living down in San Antonio and visiting clients in South Texas and in East Texas, where a lot of oil and gas was, and
Beautiful part of the country.
yeah, and so I wouldn't say that was like, hey, I'm drawn to this industry. What I loved about it was that I went around and I was talking to business owners all day, every day.
Yeah.
And in a lot of cases, right, you're going out to provide a service, which the safety services are part of the services that we provided. But I was also learning and experiencing and somewhat, and I always believe that perspective is very, very important in life. And the perspective is that these people that ran businesses or started businesses or had businesses handed down to them and their family, they weren't any different than other people that I'd met in my life. They didn't have some kind of super special thing about them. And that's very intimidating, when I thought back in that time of, how, I'm talking to this business owner, someone that employs people and that kind of thing. So the greatest advantage I got out of that was understanding business owners and getting to see that they were like I was.
Yeah.
But when I really fell in love with the industry and said, this is kind of who I am and what I was doing, was in the second job that I got, and that job was with a company that, same industry, obviously, and staff leasing, and in that job I started in the safety side, but moved into the sales and sales management side, and I really, really enjoyed that, and that kind of got me hooked.
Yeah. Before we dive into you taking a leap as your own business owner and diving in and founding Nextep, what are the entrepreneurial tendencies you have growing up? Do you have any, or does it get sparked by you working in safety and meeting business owners? How does this come about to think that, like, if there comes a point where I want to do this on my own, I can do this? Did you always have an entrepreneurial bone in your body? Are you selling candy as a kid? Are you selling, light bulbs door to door? Like, was there anything there, or did that come later for you?
Well, my dad was military, so I didn't have that. Where I'd see my father working in an entrepreneurial way. I think for me it was that experience of seeing a lot of entrepreneurs and meeting a lot of entrepreneurs, and when you go and you're meeting with people to provide those services, a lot of times, there's those casual times, and one of my favorite things about sitting down with small business owners was to hear their story, and a lot of, you do that every day,
Yeah.
but what is your story? Why did you found the business, and those kind of things. So I've heard thousands of those stories over the years, and I think that probably planted that seed more than anything.
On a personal side, do you meet your wife, you have kids, and is that when you're in San Antonio, or does that come later as well?
Yeah, my wife Jill, and we've been married for 32 years. She's from Altus also, but we didn't. People say, "Oh, we're your high school sweethearts," and we weren't high school sweethearts. We dated once or twice. Kind of bumped into each other. Altus is small. I don't want to say bumped into each other, but bumped into each other and said, "Hey, we ought to go on a date," and then that fizzled out. But it wasn't until I was in the workforce, a couple of years out of college, and one day my wife had kind of bumped into my sister somewhere. We didn't have social media and all these ways to contact. So if you moved and you were in San Antonio, if someone would have to put some effort into getting your number and finding you. But my wife had bumped into my sister, and my sister gave her my number, and she reached out. And I was like, well, funny thing, you reached out. I'm going to be in Dallas next week. Of course, I wasn't, but I was
played
then.
those games,
And plans changed quickly.
Yeah.
And I went up to Dallas, and we went out on a date. And about 14 months later, we were married.
Good for you. Love that. Well, what year was that?
We got married in 1993.
Okay. Giving you brownie points there because she's probably listening. Just glad you remember that one on the fly.
She'll check the math. That might be 31 years.
Yeah.
So
we're getting close.
You nailed it.
Yeah. How many kids you got?
I have 3 kids.
Okay.
I have a son, Jordan, and a middle daughter, Gracie, and a younger son, Michael.
Okay. Love that. Do they share your passion for entrepreneurship and business?
They really do, actually. And my oldest son, Jordan, is in the sports memorabilia and sports cards and really does great in that. And I'm proud of him. My daughter I've always had a pretty strong anti-nepotism policy because early on I had some difficulty with family involved in the business, and it really, which is fine, you can work through difficulty, but when it affects the whole family and it affects your wife's family, then those things can get hairy, and I decided that's not any fun. But my daughter does work at Nextep. She sells for Nextep in our Denver office, and she's done fantastic. She made President's Club this year. I'm very proud of her. I said, hey, if you want to come on and you want to learn the business, you don't want to be treated too special because your dad owns the company. You need to go out in the field and sell.
Yeah.
And my youngest son, Michael, is in the cannabis industry here in Oklahoma, and he has a company called Burley Botanicals, and that's what he does.
Yeah. So they didn't want to follow the football footsteps that you had as a kid. Then
I know we didn't. My daughter was a really talented athlete. My oldest son was more into creative things, art, and that kind of stuff. And my youngest son was a basketball player. He liked basketball.
Yeah. Growing up, having the kids grow up and be in Norman, for the most part, is that kind of where you raise your kids?
Yes,
so
yes.
You're raised around athletics, raised around the university. Obviously, I assume you're big OU fans.
Yeah, you can't help but be an OU fan, and I've not that I ever had any reason not to love watching OU football, but moving to Norman in '97, and Bob Stoops coming in, I think in '98, fever caught on, and we became big OU fans.
Yeah. So the business, Nextep, how does that come about? When does it come a point when you're working for somebody else and you think, you know what, there's an opportunity here. If I don't do it now, maybe I'll never do it. And taking that leap as an entrepreneur with a family and having a wife and all the things that I think, people think about the bad things, right? I have all this, I'm giving up, benefits and maybe all these other things to take this huge leap, and it's a risk. But clearly it's paid off. And so would love to hear from you on your words, what that time in your life is like, how those conversations are with your wife, Jill, and the family, and to just think, you know what, I'm going to do this. It's the right thing to do. I need to do this because there's a need. And to take that, no pun intended, next step, and really launch a business. And you mentioned you have a Denver office. Clearly it's successful. It's across different states.
Yeah. I think I talk about this a lot, and it's a story we share at Nextep, and I think about it because it is such a interesting phenomenon, especially if you didn't have someone that was close to you and watch them go into business like that.
Yeah.
And for me, I'd never seen that. I didn't hardly know what business was or what business owners did. Before I went out and had that experience talking to so many of them. But I think if you're like me, or a lot of people I think have times or evenings when they're sitting around, maybe they've had a couple of cocktails, and I said have visions of grandeur, or just thoughts of, hey, I should start a business. And a lot of those thoughts is, hey, I should start a business because, hey, I want to be successful and I want to, do those kind of things. But that's a long, long way from stepping out and actually starting a business. And for us, my wife and I were married a couple of years. We had moved from Dallas back to Austin, and I was running a branch. I'd started a branch there from scratch for the company that I was working for, and that's when I'd moved into sales and sales management. And, I thought, hey, I've learned a lot about and built this branch from scratch. I might be able to do that on my own. But there really was a catalyst that drove the decision to say, hey, I might take the risk to go out and start my own business, because we were newly married. We had just had our first son, Jordan, and he was about 7 months old. And it's not typically a time you say, hey, I want to stop having a steady paycheck.
Right.
And it's certainly not the time my wife would say, hey, you should stop having a steady paycheck. But what happened is one morning I had gotten up and I was covering the Houston branch as well. So I needed to go to Houston for the day from Austin and go down there and we were looking for a new manager, so I was covering that. And my wife called, and we were getting a long time where I had one of the first cell phones. I thought that was pretty cool. My wife called me, and I'm driving down the road, and she said, hey, my brother is having these headaches, and I'm going to get Jordan packed up. I'm going to go back. We got to see what's going on. And, got a call a couple days later that they had found a tumor in his brain, and that tumor was a very aggressive, 100% fatal form of cancer called a glioblastoma. And, that was just a devastating blow to everyone in the family. So, those that have been in that situation and seen in a part of that, it turns everybody's life upside down, and everybody's rallying to try to figure things out. And for us, it was a very, interesting time, because my wife is a pharmacist, and she chose not to work once we had kids, but she has some medical understanding, and she wanted to be there to try to help, because even though there's not a great prognosis, people want to try to do whatever to deal with that situation. She wanted to go back, and she's kind of the organizer and coordinator. So when you're in Austin and you got to get back to Altus, it's about 9 hours any way you slice it, right? Whether you drive it or you fly it. Yeah. And so I'm driving back and forth on the weekends. And, the thing that I think happens is when you see somebody in that situation, and when you live with someone, and Jay ended up living for another 2 years and did some trials and things like that. He was able to see his first son get born, because when he was diagnosed, he had just been married. His wife was pregnant. She had started her first job as a school teacher in Altus, and he was starting his dental practice. He was a 24-year-old dentist, and one of the youngest guys to graduate from OU Dental School. And life was really getting started for him, and then boom, that's just all turned around. And for me, and I'm sure for everybody, but what that did for me was really change my perspective of life, and risk tolerance, and what those things mean. And so, when we think about that, it's certainly a sad and emotional time, but I try to think of the positives and some of the try to take something good out of bad situations when I can. And one of the things that was so great about spending that time with Jay was really the perspective of life that he shared. And I credit that. I have a thing on my desk, a little metal plaque, and I was given that by somebody a long time ago. And one of the things it says, "What would you attempt to do if you knew you couldn't fail?" And I always think about that, and I've kept that, and that's been part of that story of Jay. And it was like, why not try to start a business? What is the worst that could happen? And what if I was the one that got sick? Or we find out real quickly at a young age that life's not forever. And when you're 26, 27, it feels like you're going to live forever.
Yeah, you feel bulletproof, right?
Yeah. And so I always say that I don't believe I would have ever taken the step from, having a beer and having visions of grandeur of starting my own business, because my career was going great. I mean, I was doing well at that company, and I enjoyed working there. But I wanted to get back and be by family. And the best idea I had was, and I called my wife and I said, "Hey, I'm going to quit my job and I'll sell most of our stuff, and we'll sell our house." And I think we were able to kind of have a nest egg of about $30,000. And you can stay at home and Altus and help your brother, and I'll go up during the week and start this business. And that'll get us all together and give me something to do.
Yeah.
And hopefully I'll have some success. And that was kind of the beginning of the birth of Nextep.
Yeah, that's, we've heard this a million times. We talk about it a lot on the podcast. People share their stories, and there's always the why, right? And it's, it's where you get to it and what fuels you every day. And, it's not the money, it's not the freedom, because running your own business, it's not freedom. It's making a difference and having that little push, right? And that, that plaque that you see every day, right? That's sits with you, and
Yes.
and also, like I said, it's not, we could wake up tomorrow and have the same diagnosis. Who knows? You don't know what life's going to give to you. Life isn't fair sometimes, and some of the best people get dealt the wrong hand.
Life is not fair. And that's, anytime I'm talking to someone that is going through a tough time, and sometimes, I have those talks with people that work at Nextep and different things. That's a phrase I latched onto a long time ago, and it's like, hey, life's just not fair. Sometimes, and most of the time, from my perspective, if I'm going to be in pain, from whatever event's going on, that doesn't seem fair to me. But all we can do is take the next step in front of us and try to do the next right thing. And for me, at that time, the next right thing was getting all the family in one place and being there to support my wife as she supported her brother, and hopefully carve out some kind of living as an entrepreneur with $30,000 to do that with. So, and that became, because nowadays with social media, there's a little more at least some understanding of people that, they hear about tech companies and they hear about people that get money from other, from a venture capitalist or private equity firm, and I'm going to get this money and I'm going to start a business. Overwhelmingly, even when I talk to business owners today, that's not how businesses get started, right?
Yeah.
It's bootstrap, starving, working for free, and family bailing you out. When we would go home on the weekends, we'd go shopping in our parents' cupboards, and we'd get all the canned food and all the leftovers, and we'd try to survive.
Yeah. So during this time you start this business, you're traveling, you said traveling up. So you're traveling up to Norman, Oklahoma City to start the business, and then what is the original idea of what is the business going to be?
Yeah, well, I had really done two things consistently. One was in college. I worked for a guy that did concert security, and I would get everybody to show up and schedule everybody, and we did all the concerts at the Marriott and all those kind of things. And then I had this experience working in this PEO field, so it didn't have a lot of options, and I could do t-shirt security at a concert, or I might do PEO, and so I opened that branch from scratch in Austin, and I said, I'm just going to go. Not going to open it in Altus, so I better drive it I better drive up to the city, and people say, why Norman? And I'd been around those money guys and those private equity guys, and so I learned some of that phraseology and ways to talk. And I'd say, people say, why Norman? And I'd say, we're by the university and the demographics, and we have these great people and talent graduating from the university. But, the truth is my sister lived there, and she just got married, and they bought a house, and there was a room to stay in. So I could go to Norman, stay for free during the week, go out and try to start a business and do those things.
How do you get started, and then in the terms of logistically for the business, and are you going out, you're signing accounts? And for people listening who might not know, what Nextep is, and from those early days, has it always been the same way up to now, or has the business changed as well? But what was that first initial, hey, we're making money, we've got contracts, we've got customers, we've got clients, the snowball's starting to roll? Yeah,
it's starting a business from scratch, and it is a difficult proposition, right? And some people do it maybe with a franchise in different ways, and I always say, hey, I recommend that. You get some structure and some help if you haven't ever been in that situation before. In my case, just went out, started selling business, started, trying to sell business. But the difficulty was I didn't really have much of a company. It was just me selling the way I would have sold for the company I was before. And one day I did sell an account, and I was like, oh crap, what am I going to do with this account? And so I would sold, and then I'd come back and I started building the services to service that account. And back then, the industry was still heavily focused on contractors and blue collar trade type, framers, masonry, brick work, roofing, those kind of things. And the product was a little less robust for those types of clients. They were mostly focused on payroll and workers' compensation. And so we would go in and say, hey, we do your payroll, we get you workers' compensation. You don't have to put down 20% down payment. You can just pay as you go. And so, but today the business has evolved to where it's not as much of the blue collar trades and more of white collar professional and gray collar businesses, and really heavy on all of the professional business packages from 401k and supplemental insurance packages and major medical and workers' compensation, as well as payroll, and also the technology that it takes to make all of that happen. If I had to build today the product and services that we have to sell and sign up my first account, that would have been very, very difficult to do.
Yeah. When does it become profitable? When do you start to see success and think that, yes, I did make the right decision? I don't have to go back and get a 9 to 5.
I think last week. No. It took it was 3 years before there was any money.
Yeah.
So go back to that thought of $30,000. So that's $30,000 to live off of, and $30,000 to fund starting a business. Mm-hmm. That's not a lot. Yeah. And so we had to work really hard to try to kind of support ourselves, and really luckily for us, family stepped in and helped as well. My father mortgaged his home. My wife's father backed a line of credit, and my grandparents had some savings that they also helped back a line of credit. And that gave us a little bit of breathing room on the business side, and we still had, $11,000 left of the 30 to live off of for a while, and you just plug away, and somehow, really, for our case, and the overwhelming majority of business owners that I talk to, and if people are out there thinking, how can I start a business and how could I get money to start a business, I would say just start a business and work hard. And usually the story I hear is that family helps in so many ways, and the American dream is really, in my thought, made possible by friends and family.
Yeah. How does that conversation go? And obviously you had a great support system and a great family, and it's not just your family, but your wife's family too, and then grandparents. I mean, everyone's clearly sees the vision that you have and has belief in you, which goes a long way too, right? Having that belief from family. Money's great, but having them support you and believe in you is, equally as important. What is that like, and what do you learn from that time? Because there's a lot of people listening that want to start businesses. It's easier today to start a business, I think, than it ever was, probably, with all the technology and things, depending on what you want to go do. But, you're taking all this experience of what you have in sales and in management into running your own show. But like I said, it's tense time. And also, you mentioned Jay, it's a tense time in general for the family, regardless of starting a business too. How is that navigating that, family relationships and money and starting a business, and, what are the biggest things you took away from that?
When you remind me of that, it really was a trying time, because we're talking about those first 3 years not making any money. We're talking about family members stepping in and also helping, and also this process of Jay going through his journey and his struggles and passing away, and how that affects everybody. So one thing is just that story of starting a business is very difficult and disorienting for a family and for a person. And you throw in there that my wife's, going through this with her youngest brother, and I was, and I am as well. He's my brother-in-law. I just don't know, other than to say, don't quit. I don't know. It got to a point where it was so much that we just, get up each morning and put one foot in front of the other and get out there and make it happen. So I always say, I saw a quote, I don't know if it was, I think it was from Jeff Bezos, and it was like, hey, you can be struggling for 4 years, not getting a damn thing done, and then the next year something great happens. So the power is in not giving up. And so I would say the power and the secret to the sauce there was just not giving up.
Yeah. It's, again, which is easy to say, right? It's always easy to say, but 3 years of not making any money, dealing with everything that you've had to deal with, heavy family burdens as well, and to get to where we are today, we're 13 states across the nation plus, you've got offices all over, but Oklahoma is your base. Tell me a little bit about, initially obviously you started the business here, and then that launch of, hey, we can go into another state and another state and kind of take this out. But you've always been centered in Oklahoma.
Yes. I think in one way, very, very fortunate to have started a business in Oklahoma. Especially, I think, a service business. Because Oklahomans are just great people. But being here, and you and I here in Oklahoma, we know that one of the standouts about Oklahoma and Oklahoma people is our people, and how they communicate and how they care, and just who we are as Oklahomans, I feel like comes out in the service that we provide to our clients. And, we're right here in the middle of the country, and you have these great people that are really outgoing and care. So we're just blessed because, I really think that the service that we provide is so enhanced by the Oklahoma folks. And so, I was lucky to start a business in Oklahoma from that standpoint. And then, it was like we had always done business in Texas because I had been in Texas working for so long. So I had a lot of contacts and those kind of things. And so we were in Oklahoma and Texas. And when I say Oklahoma, we were in Oklahoma and Texas. That's where we had people working and selling and servicing clients. Over the years, we would get clients in other states, or they would expand into other states. And then, you kind of get to this point where you say, hey, do we want to add more offices and capitalize on, growing, what seems to be a great business and do that. So we began to expand into states and put offices and sell into different states. And now we're in about 16 states. But we service clients in every state, in Puerto Rico and in the territories of the United States. And so it's been great.
Yeah. What's been your biggest kind of risk that you've taken, or biggest hurdle as far as, expansion? And, when you're making money and things are going great, it makes sense to expand and keep going. And so interested as an entrepreneur, you're going to come to those plateaus and keep going, like you keep saying, but there's ups and downs. Business is never, straight to the top. What are the things that stand out?
Yeah, I think, I always say, and I was lucky enough to have some great mentors along the way. And one of my mentors early on, was this older gentleman, and he was a provo at OU, and I think over the Bureau of Indian Affairs for a while years ago. And he told me one day, he said, Brian, don't let anybody fool you. Because a lot of times people will come and they'll say, oh, your business is big, you must be so busy, your business is getting big, and all of these kind of things. And it is true, there's different things. But he says, don't let anybody fool you. The bigger you get, the easier it'll get. And if you think about being a small startup, I mean, I had to go in for 2 to 3 years. One of my schedules was I had to go in on Tuesday morning and work till Wednesday night, because the only way to sell the accounts, service the accounts, process the taxes and pay the taxes in the time frame that they had to be done was to work through the night manually calculating those tax obligations. So when you have more people working for you and helping you, you don't have to do that. And so I always remembered that, but investing in growth and growing is scary, right? Because there's always a trade-off. As you know, I'm going to spend some money to grow, which is going to cause me to lose money, and will that pay off? And what's the formula to make it pay off? And we were kind of lucky enough. One was that I had that experience from that second company I worked for, and it was the second company to go public in our space. We missed being the first company. It was a big race between us and another one, just by a few months, but we kind of went public at the same time. But what that did was taught me a lot of the formulas that you could use to be successful in our industry. And one of those was, how do you grow, and how do you invest in growth, and what happens when you do. And perspective is so important, as we spoke about, so you get to see it work. So some of that takes away some of that mystique, but it's still really scary to grow and make those steps. And I'm not somebody that ever had a partner or an investment group or taking money from other people. So it was always our money and our risk, and those things can be scary. But what I try to do is anything that I think of that's scary, if I'm thinking of that past dusk, if I'm thinking of that when it's night, then I try to disregard those things, right? Okay. Because the things I think about in the evenings, those are not going to be productive in when it comes to taking risk and being successful. Because that's usually when we think about, what's out there in the dark that could get us.
Yeah, you're taking you away from your focus, right? And your day-to-day mission of what you need to do to be productive. As far as from a management side and growing and managing more people, what are some of the core lessons that you've learned, as far as managing people? And, it's clear what your why is, but how do you help people find their own personal why and figure out what they're good at and maneuver them in a way that not only helps the business grow, but helps them grow individually as well?
I think so much of having a successful business is culture, and is hiring the people that fit into your culture. So you're always trying to balance, great talent, right? You might have someone that has great talent and great ability, but may not fit into the culture of the people that you work with. So for us, building a culture of caring people that want to see our customers succeed, that really enjoy helping people and helping our clients, that's critical to us. And sometimes a lot of times we may hire someone that maybe might not be the strongest candidate for a particular position, but they're the strongest candidate that fits into who we are and what we do. And that's really served us well, because if you can do that and you can build the kind of culture that you want, I think the power of growth and profitability and customer retention is just magnified tremendously by that. Yeah.
As of today, what's the plan? What's the growth look like? And where do you see, the next 10 years? And how do you vision that? Are you kind of like a planner, or are you more of a short term with a long term goal? Like, what do you see where do you see the business going now? And what's the vision for it, I guess?
Yeah, well, we're in an expansion mode. We're opened 4 offices this year. We're going to open 4 more next year. Our goal is to double in size, and we're about a third of the way there. Mm-hmm. And we've had this goal over 4 years to double in size, so we're in a heavy expansion mode. I couldn't be more optimistic about Oklahoma and Oklahoma's future, but also the United States and our future here. And I just think it's a great time to get out and be an entrepreneur if you want to be an entrepreneur, or do whatever it is that you want to do, because there's just all kinds of opportunity out there. So we're going to continue to expand in a measured way, and luckily enough now we've done it. We have 16 offices in 16 different states, so we have a formula that we follow, and that works, and we're just going to continue to keep doing that and laying that blueprint out and work towards success. And we think our culture is what helps hold all that together and drive us that way.
Outside of work and outside of the business, what keeps your mind off work? Is there anything that you, and I use the word addicted to in a good way, what are you interested in? What has you addicted as far as outside of the business? Do you read a lot? Are you into any sports? What keeps you mind fresh and out of the way of diving too much into the business?
That is one thing I struggle with.
Okay.
Because you talked about business and how that people might think, hey, I want to start a business so I can have freedom, but when you start a business, you're kind of lassoed to that business 24/7. It's a mental struggle most of the time, but that's how it goes. For my wife and I, it's Oklahoma City Thunder, and of course we're talking right here after they won a national, won the NBA championship, and we've been big Thunder ticket holders, for a long time now. And these days we get to sit down there courtside, and we were there for the championship and all the playoffs, and we try to do date night every week, and we do that, but thank goodness the Thunder has 42 home games. It takes a lot of pressure off of
you don't have to rethink 42 date nights, right?
It's like, boom, here's date night, and we're going out. And so we love the Thunder, and just really proud of what they've done and what they've accomplished. So that's kind of our thing. Other than that, it's a hike. I like to go on hikes. My kids like to do hikes. We were just in Denver with my daughter, and we did a couple of 3 and 4 mile hikes. Nothing long, but getting out in nature is probably the best way to kind of calm down a little bit and get away.
No grandkids yet?
No grandkids yet, but we're probably hopefully in the next few years we'll see how that goes. Yeah.
Talk to me about being a fan. What it's like to have that buzz, that energy. You're sat courtside, you're standing courtside, you're around this this incredible moment, NBA Finals, NBA playoffs. It kind of levels the playing field as far as you're not thinking about work, you're not thinking about what you got to do tomorrow. You're just in that bubble of it's probably the most present feeling you have in your life, right? Your life personally, not just life in general, but your life, with how busy you are and the things you have going on. For those couple of hours, you're not looking at your phone, right? It's just the game that's in front of you, and you're enjoying it with your wife. How is that feeling? What is it like? And can you describe it for people listening that may never get the opportunity to sit, courtside at an NBA Finals game in your home city?
Well, it's hard to describe, honestly, but of course it was. I'll talk about a little bit about Game 7, because it was all wrapped up in a bow on Sunday night there just a week ago now, and it was I had been to a couple of OU national championship games. Unfortunately, 2 that didn't work our way, and that's no fun, right? But great accomplishments for the Sooners and in those years. But that was the first sporting event that I'd been to where my team won the whole thing, and I couldn't be more complimentary of Sam Presti and Clay Bennett and the way that we were talking about culture and the way, culture is, if you don't believe me about culture, and why, you don't have to, but the Thunder are all there for us to see. And the Thunder are driven by culture. Their championship, I believe, was won on culture. And I think a lot of the things I was talking about hiring and culture, you can just say the Thunder drafting and having people on their team and culture really align. Yeah. So don't believe me, take a look at the Thunder. And because the way they did it is so different than the way everybody else has done it. And it speaks to the power of the team over the power of the individual. And when you think about the NBA being the superstar league and having a big 1 or 2 or 3, and we certainly have our superstars. Mm-hmm. Shout out to Shea and his big new contract, and deserves every bit of it. But he is not that in the typical sense of the NBA and that kind of thing. So we were there, we're sitting in Game 7, and it was the most electric, special feeling I think I've ever felt at any time in my life. And to see all of that come together and to be there, at the end when they pull out the stage and they're doing the awards things, you've seen those iconic images so many times in your life, with sporting events. Confetti
everywhere.
Yeah, confetti and all of that, and you're just standing right there in the middle of it. It was so special. I'll never forget it, and I'm just grateful we got to be a part of it. And what a great thing for Oklahoma and Oklahoma City and the Thunder, and I'm sure we're going to be season ticket holders for the rest of our lives.
Awesome. What a great way to finish. I want to thank you so much for coming in. Thanks for taking the time out to share your story. It's great. The one thing I love doing this podcast, everyone's got a story and everyone's got a personal story, and yours is definitely a special one. So thanks for coming in. Wish you all the best and continued success, and maybe you'll be a corporate partner of Thunder if you're not yet. I'm sure there's something there. Maybe that's a goal. That's a goal on the list. Have the Nextep logo on the jersey if you want to, push the Loves brand out the way. But maybe that's a goal one day. I'm sure the company would love to see that. But Brian, thanks so much for coming in. I really appreciate your time. For people listening, I'll put the link to the website. Then go check that out. And then, is there anything? Can people come see you speak? Do you do any speaking engagements or anything that people reaching out, or maybe someone wants to reach out and pick your brain on things? Is there a way that they can reach you?
Well, I think Tyler's sitting over here, so he's in our marketing. He heads up our marketing department, and he can get hold of me. But my email bfayak@nextep.com. First initial, last name. Reach out. Mm-hmm. There's I always love sharing what my experiences have been, and in any way that I could help anybody. And if there's someone out there that is trying to figure out how to start a business, or wants a little advice or any input, it always brings me a lot of joy to at least share what my experience was, and then everybody has a different experience. But more than willing to try to help.
Awesome. And the biggest takeaway is just don't give up. Keep going, keep pushing on, don't give up, because the good things will be on the other side of it. And the only thing that is certain is if you give up, you'll never know. So thanks for being on the podcast. Really appreciate it. And people listening, we'll catch you next episode. Cheers.
Thank you.
Hope you guys enjoyed that great episode. Thank you so much for listening. As always, huge shout out to our sponsors, the Oklahoma Hall of Fame, sharing Oklahoma story through its people since 1927. For more information on the Oklahoma Hall of Fame, go to www.oklahomahof.com and follow them on Instagram for daily updates at oklahomahof. Our other sponsor, the Chickasaw Nation, amazing sponsor. They do amazing things for the state, and they're always sponsoring something in Oklahoma. They're a huge supporter of Oklahoma, and without their support, we wouldn't be able to do what we do. This episode is brought to you by the Doghouse OKC. Recently, I have been in need of some doggy daycare for my 2 pups, and the Doghouse have come in clutch. The team over there are incredible. They've taken care of my 2 golden doodles, and so it's been an honor to partner with them on the podcast and share the love. And adding to that is the Doghouse. And so if you're in need of doggy daycare in the day or boarding overnight, they do grooming and other cool things too, but I've had a fantastic experience, and it's an honor and a privilege to share this with you too. So go to thedogHouseOKC.com and follow them on Instagram at thedogHouseOKC, and hopefully our pups will run into each other.
Thank you for listening. We are inspired by those around us and hope that you are too. Make sure you subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a review so we can keep telling your stories. For more great Oklahoma content, follow This Is Oklahoma on Facebook and Instagram.